Jennie Larkin is our keynote speaker, and she'll talk about big data to knowledge and potential funding agency synergies. So again, my goal was to try to mix NIH, PCORI, AHRQ, and all the agencies, so you could get the best of all worlds. So why don't I prepare it for Jennie? It should be here. And it's the pointer is the top one.
Okay.
There, good.
All right. Thank you. And I'll be staring at you for the time, and I just promise to shut up when I'm supposed to. But I want to start off saying I'm sorry I came late yesterday, but all of the talks have been great, and everything that's going on with PCORnet is also very similar to what we're looking for in the Big Data to Knowledge initiative at NIH. So how do I go forward? There we go. And this is just very briefly. I'm going to talk a little bit about Big Data to Knowledge and the Associate Director for Data Science Office and what we're doing, who we are, and some of the partnerships that we're looking for. But the take-home message, you can now go back and check your email, is everything you've been hearing for the last day is very much in alignment with what we're looking to do as well. There, see, go check your email. All right, so the mission statement for Big Data to Knowledge and for the data science at NIH is our goal is to foster an ecosystem that enables biomedical research to be conducted as a sustainable digital enterprise with the goal of, where NIH, enhancing health, lengthening life, and reducing illness and disability. So that's, you know, when we get into the details of the infrastructure and the compute this and the standards that, it's important to remind yourself in the back of your mind, this is why we're doing all these things, not just because we like computer things. All right, so why are we doing this? We're doing this because the biomedical research workforce has been amazingly effective. They've been wonderfully productive. And what this shows, this is a number of data sets over time from 2000 to 2012. But the y-axis could be almost any measure of biomedical research productivity. They all essentially look the same. There's a big increase, especially over the last 10 years, in the amount of data and resources that are being generated at the same time that the budget line, woo, come back, my friend, that the budget line is flat. All right, so amazing productivity, all these great resources coming online, and business as usual, as we've been used to in the past, isn't going to sustain it. So we need to look at newer, better, innovative ways to keep up the research, to keep doing what we're doing in this more flat budget environment. So that is the impetus that's underlying it. So just to look at where we are really right now, or maybe a couple of years ago, in the state of the biomedical research enterprise versus what we really need it to look like to deal with this challenge we're facing. First of all, we have a lot of digital assets. So data, software, tools, publications, standards, all these things are digital information or digital assets. And they're distributed a lot of different places. And like the last slide I just showed you, there are more and more of them all the time. This is great, except for they're sort of hard to find and use. So we've been really productive, and we need to find a better way of dealing with it. And the other thing that hasn't come up so much explicitly in this meeting is that much of the biomedical research enterprise is concept-centric, is publication-centric. And all of the rewards and incentives and metrics are based on publications because that's what we're used to. All right, so that was more or less the way things are now. And this is what we're thinking might be the way of the future and what we need to build toward. And the first is that we want to have all these digital assets. We want them to be available in an ecosystem. essentially everything you've been hearing about for the last day, data and software sharing. We want to enable that. And in addition, we want there to be greater prominence of these assets. So not only should researchers get recognition for the publications, but for the data or software or standards they share and that other people reuse. There are more ways of being productive than simply publications, is what we're thinking. And the other important component of this is a data science savvy research workforce and clinical workforce, just like we heard yesterday, that the clinicians that are doing really well are the ones that are more savvy in the data science and the computational areas, hopefully. All right, so how do we get there? From where we are to tomorrow? Well, about 3 years ago, Francis Collins looked at this and said, oh no, how are we going to face this? And he established the Data Informatics Working Group, and some of the people in the room were on that panel, and they wrote this really, really helpful report. And very, very briefly, a few of the overarching themes in this report. One is that NIH is right now, based on that first graph, at a pivotal point where we're almost about to fail to capitalize on these technological advances. And the phrase that really got resonance was that NIH was bordering on institutional malpractice, paying for all this data generation and new technologies and not really taking advantage of them as well as they ought. Second important point, cultural changes will be essential both within NIH and across the biomedical research workforce to really make all this happen. And a long-term commitment at NIH is required to this data science. So NIH, Francis Collins took this very seriously and immediately implemented two things. One was to establish a high-level data science position at the NIH, the Associate Director for Data Science, who would help be a focal point for this activity at NIH and coordinate across all the institutes and centers. We're delighted to have stolen Phil Bourne from you for this position. The other aspect is the long-term funding of these activities. So despite the flat funding level that I showed you in that first graph, all of the NIH institutes and centers have committed significant funds through the year 2020 to really help facilitate this change and make it happen. So we heard, and we're doing our best to respond. So I thought I'd go through a few of the major data science problems that were identified in that report and indicate the sort of activities that we're doing in response to them. So one of the first and most important aspects of the problems that we're solving is the need to locate and cite these digital assets. For example, locating and citing data, locating and citing software. So one of the very first things that the Big Data to Knowledge will be doing is supporting data and software discovery indices, and that's an award we're looking to make in the next year. Another incredibly important aspect is that even if you can find all these assets, you need to ensure they're both usable and useful. That means data and metadata standards. And this is an activity that BD2K, we've started doing some level of activity, but we're really ramping up in this coming year. And later on, I'll show you, we have a request for information live right now that I have the link later in the presentation that we very much want everybody to respond to. We want your input. We don't want to rebuild the wheel. We want to do what's useful and build on what's already out there. Another important aspect, and this goes to the cultural change, is we need to extend the policies and practices for data sharing. So we are working across NIH and across agencies and even possibly internationally to try to figure out what are the best way, what are the policies and practices we need to change, and what are the incentives in the cultural change that we can really help facilitate. And of course, the other big area where the funding will be going to is new data science research. We need new and better tools to make all this happen. This means new innovative ideas, applications, and development, and that's where a large part of the BD2K funding will be going. And we're looking to make an award of a number of centers again within the next couple weeks because fiscal year 14 ends on the 30th of the month. And so we're making some big centers awards in the next couple of weeks. But next year we're going to be making a variety of different sorts of awards as well for both big and small research in data science. And of course, training researchers who can use biomedical big data effectively. Workforce development is critical in this issue. We need to have more people in the academic track as well as people that go off into industry who are knowledgeable in this area to really make this happen. All right, that's just a reiteration that what we're looking about, in order for all those points to happen, in order to envision this future, we need to make this sustainable digital research enterprise real. All right, so when I say blah, 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 components of digital research enterprise, what does that really mean? What is a digital research enterprise? First of all, the digital assets, so data sets, paper, software, metadata, lab note, publications, you name it, digital objects. In order for them to be really part of this digital enterprise, they each need to be uniquely identified and have provenance. So that they can be tracked and found and people's contributions can be known and reflected. Another important aspect is it needs robust, scalable, interoperable computer infrastructure. We have a lot of those assets right now, but whether they are all as fully interoperable as they could ideally be is not known. And of course, the digital assets should interoperate across them. So that's when we're talking about the digital enterprise, the assets, the provenance, and the infrastructure as well. All right, I'm not going to go through the whole slide. I'm just going to pick on a couple. But to sort of ground this in reality of what would it mean? What would the impact? What are examples of a digital enterprise? And how would this affect real researchers in their lives? So I'll pick on a couple. So these are a variety of different goals of the digital enterprise. So for example, sustainability. As everybody knows, this is always a long-term problem. So how do you, within a limited budget, both support innovative, clever new research and new ideas while also sustaining the essential things that cannot go away? In order to do that, you need to have some sort of way of both assessing what you're doing, what should stay, what needs to go, and what are the new important things that come online. One of the and these are always difficult things to do because we don't always have the best metrics, so that's another important thing we want to do, but is to try to figure out, are there better ways than we have right now for doing sustainability of this sort of infrastructure and these sort of assets? So one idea that came out of a meeting with the Moore Foundation and a batch of different funders, and it's not necessarily going to be implemented, but it's an idea, is for these long-term resources, what if at a certain point you go into a 50-50 business model? So your long-term funder, instead of always going to one funder and saying, hey, NIH, you've supported me for 10 years, keep doing it for another 10 years. What if at a certain point we say, you're right, you're really important, but if you're really as important as you say, we will keep paying for half of it, and you have to come up with the other half somewhere else. That's a hard thing to ask. It's a hard thing to do, and it means both the funders as well as the researchers need to break out of their old mindset and try to be innovative both in the methods of funding as well as establishing these sort of collaborations. But if you look in the bigger picture, that might help generate new innovation and make more robust ways of funding things long term. I'll just pick one more. Another important one is reproducibility. Incredibly important. So you have a nice paper right now, and yet you keep seeing really nice papers retracted, right? That doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy. But if you had data associated with each publication, then people could go in and they could retest it and they could say, yeah, that's the way it's done. And if they like those methods enough, they could then port those methods to their own paper and cite that original paper and those methods. So the whole idea of science is it's supposed to be reproducible. And this idea of the digital enterprise is it might facilitate that reproducibility, because I could tell you for a long time I've been running computational biology portfolios and models, and there is not a computational model that is published in print that is correct in every sense. There are always typos or something. But if you have a link to the model itself and a link, the functional model, and a link to the data itself, then it might help circumvent those well-meant but errors that happen in publication. All right, so one of the things I wanted to emphasize is this is not just an NIH or federal mandate, although we have a federal mandate from the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and it's not just something that happens in the research world. This is really something that needs to be a community endeavor of both the funders and the researchers, and I really truly do believe that together we can do this. We can make this digital research enterprise that will make everybody's lives better and allow researchers to focus on the research. I cannot tell you the number of times I've talked to people trying to do innovative data integration and how much of their time is spent on cleaning up that same data set from someone else over and over again before they get to do their actual innovation. What if the data you obtained were clean from the get-go because they all match to standards? So you, as researchers, could do more innovative research and less tidying up after people. And these are just some of the example components of the research ecosystem, and just say it's funders, it's government, it's multiple agencies, it's private sectors, industry, and it's organizations, professional societies, PCORI, our friend PCORI, and other sorts of things. So we're really thinking large in this ecosystem of working together to build it. All right, so trying to move right along so I don't run out of time. So how are we going to build it? Well, first of all, there, as I mentioned, NIH mandate and support. And here's a picture of Francis Collins being very, very happy because he just hired Phil Bourne to be our ADDS. Oh, that's incorrect. That's not intramural participation. That was a typo. That's NIH participation. So we have Phil, and we're standing up the ADDS office, which I'm part of. And in addition, we have NIH participation from across all of the institutes and centers, and we have more than 100 people from across all of them that are really interested and committed to making this happen. And we have substantial funding. So as I mentioned, we're getting about $30 million out the door in the next couple of weeks. Ask me about when I'm going to sleep next. Next year, the funding ramps up to about 80 million, and then it goes up to about 100 million through the year 2020. So NIH is committing significant resources to this, and we're really hoping that the biomedical research enterprise is committing significant resources in time and energy and willingness to work together as well. This is the most complex slide in history. No, it's not. So when Phil came on board, everything I mostly talked to you now was what was put in place during the search for the ADDS, because we couldn't wait for him to come on board. We had to start doing things. But Phil's come on board for, wow, more than half a year, and it's been great. And one of his skills is to be able to really look at the big picture and fit things together. And he looked at what was going on and said, in fact, what he saw was he's the one who really coined the biomedical digital research enterprise, but he also saw these 5 different themes, right? So the sustainability that I've touched on, education across the workforce, innovation, ensuring that we don't just do boring old style things, but come up with new and better ways of doing things, process both within NIH and outside NIH, as well as collaboration, and thought, well, for each of these, what's an example of a deliverable in that area? And I'll go into each of these in a little bit of detail. So sustainability, one example of how it might be implemented is the commons or the data commons. An example of a deliverable for education would be a training center in data science. And innovation is the BD2K extramural funding really paying you guys to be innovative and contribute back. The process is, for example, modified review. Any of you that have gone into NIH for funding in sort of edgy data science areas know that sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't. And the NIH standard process can be a bit slow. So trying to think, if it's a fast-moving field, are there new innovative ways that we can do review to make it work better? And the collaboration is, of course, improved communication. NIH NIH doesn't always have a really good way of having two-way communication, and that's one of the things we're trying to figure out. And I'm not going to go through this in detail. The slides are up on Phil's SlideShare site. But just say we've worked out various potential features of all of these aspects, and the whole idea of that all of these will drive toward developing this biomedical research digital enterprise. So very briefly to talk about what have we been doing over the last year in addition to hiring Phil. We've held a lot of workshops and requests for information to get more and more community input. We've established this new office, and by the way, this new office has lots of complexities within NIH and how it operates, and we have a multi-council working group and all those things, sorry, behind the scenes. And as I mentioned, we've published a batch of RFAs, and we will be awarding new data science research, just very briefly, on the Data Discovery Index Coordination Consortium, a series of training awards for short courses, open educational resources, and mentored career development. These are all going out the door in the next few weeks. BD2K Investigator-Initiated Centers of Excellence, and a BD2K Links Perturbation Data Coordination Integration Center. So those are all the awards that we're looking to make in the next couple of weeks. Please look to NIH. We're looking to organize a press release and briefing in association with the release of those awards, so you can find out more about them later. All right, so just to talk a little teeny bit about each of these areas. So I keep talking about the commons. What do we mean by the commons? Well, this is being pushed forward by both Vivian Bonazzi in the ADDS office and George Komatsoulis from NCBI, formerly of NCI. And what is a commons, right? So ways of thinking about it is Dropbox like storage. So you could just put your data somewhere. Right now, some data types have nice, tidy existing repositories, and a lot of them don't. So wouldn't it be nice to have someplace you could just put your data? The opportunity to apply quality metrics to your data, because that's the other thing that comes up. Well, there's a lot of data out there. Do you really want to reuse that? How do you know? You need quality metrics. By doing that, there's a place to collaborate and to discover new collaborators, new ideas. And the other really important aspect is bring the compute to the data. Anybody who's worked on really big data sets like dbGaP or SRIA, and also worked, as Lucilla does, on getting people access to the compute, know that there are a lot of restrictions. So right now you get these data, and then it has to get sent to you, and you have to keep it on a computer that's not connected to the internet like it exists, and then you do all these things. But what if you had a secure way of going to the data, like, for example, the iDash Cloud, and and you could go there, you could do your compute, you could bring your analyses back. And this is why I'm saying a lot of what's been talked about over the last day is very much in line with what we're thinking. So we're also trying to think of, all right, if this is the goal, what are the ways we can start to test out in a sort of agile process of how to develop the commons? We're interested in looking into public-private partnerships, as well as other sorts of partnerships to make this happen. We're working across NIH, across the institutes and centers, to identify and run these sort of cloud pilots. Examples of things of interest might be moving either dbGaP or the sequence read archive to a cloud, making sure you do that in a secure and approved manner, and also experiment with new funding strategies. You know, just giving people R01 is not necessarily the right way to do everything. So what are the new, better, clever ways that we can do it better so you can do what you need to do better? And then, of course, to evaluate it. How can we do this in a sort of rapid churn, agile process, just like we heard yesterday, so we can really learn, did this work? Great. We'll keep doing it. Did it not work? Great. What can we do to fix it? And this is in sort of longer, lengthier words. What is a common? Is a commons? A lot of what we're thinking is it might use flexible or cloud-based computing to support big data and scalable analysis, allowing the researchers to bring their analysis to the data, and also support sharing, accessibility, and discoverability of biomedical data and analytical tools. There are a lot of commons-like activity right now, but they're in smaller focused areas. So what we're interested in doing is both identifying those and also identifying bigger themes or ways to make them scale better. So the next area is the education that's led by Michelle Dunn from our office. And what are the goals? So there are two goals. We discussed this in the group I was in yesterday to a certain amount. So you do need to develop a stronger group of specialized researchers really skilled in the science of big data, focused on that. But you also need to elevate the general competency of most biomedical researchers or clinical researchers in the whole area of data usage and analysis and data science. They don't need to become experts, but they need some level of familiarity. So if nothing else, they can collaborate better with your data scientists going into the future. And Phil's story is, of course, how to combat the Google bus. I've heard it several times now, the story of how he has all these great people in his, would have all these great people in his lab here, and inevitably they just got hired by Google and went to the Google bus. And I know from when I was working a lot with people at Stanford, that's what happened to everybody from their biomedical informatics program. They just moved 2 miles away to Mountain View to work for Google, and why wouldn't they? And there are a variety of different methods we're thinking of addressing and improving this training. The next area is the innovation. This is the BD2K funding. This is run by me and Mark Geyer, who is the former deputy director of NHGRI. And I've already mentioned a batch of these, so I won't go through them again. But the new ones is the notice for the data and metadata standards. I'm going to keep looking at that. It's NOT Notice CA 14054. I do encourage you to respond to it, and also to think about how and if and how standards themselves should be part of this digital research ecosystem, and your ideas on that as well in responding. And right now, one of the sets of things going forward into fiscal year 15 are these smaller awards of targeted software development. And I'm going to put Heidi Sophia up on the, and I'm going to start talking soon, I promise. I'm going to put Heidi Sophia up. If you have questions, she will be delighted to answer any questions you have. We have a whole batch of new activities going forward in fiscal year 15, new workshops, trying to figure out how to bring software into the indexing standards and other sorts of activities. And I'll skip through that. And just to touch really lightly on the process and collaboration, data citation is one of the areas that we're looking at of what are the best ways of doing it, and we're working very closely across with other countries, and we expect the DDICC consortium will be very central in this area. An example, machine-readable data sharing plans. How different would your world be if every grant application was required to have a data management plan? They were peer-reviewed and they were machine-readable, so both your program officers and NIH reporter could all report on them. How would that change your lives? Probably for the better, although it might be painful at first. All right, I won't go into the other. One important thing, so we're also working with policy and policy changes. One of the, this is not ours, but it's along the same theme coming out of NIH, is the new genomic data sharing policy, and the guidance is now up on the web, and that's just my just so story of if you really had to start providing data management plans that are peer reviewed, how might that change how everything works and the cultural incentives. And we'll go through that. And I'll just end up with the result of BD2K. So if all this works, what do we get? Besides, we want more than just to spend the money. We want a real change. So we would enable a digital research enterprise that would make the pie bigger and include more people. The researchers, clinicians, computer scientists, librarians, everybody who works with digital research assets, their contributions would be recognized and supported through more than just publications, but a variety of rich ways that you contribute to the biomedical research enterprise. and to ensure that all of these resources and knowledge coming out of them can be more useful and more informative. So we get more bang for the buck, and you get to spend more time doing the fun research. And the whole idea is that there would be a cultural change both inside NIH and outside to make research more effective so we could do more with our limited dollars. That's really the whole goal. We do have websites. You can go there. You can find out more. Some of them will be vastly improved in the next few months, but they have what they have for now. And that's it. Thank you.
Great question.
That was a great presentation. Gurvanith Randhawa from AHRQ. So a couple of observations. I didn't see AHRQ listed in the list of federal agencies, and we do have a stake in this ecosystem.
We could not include everybody because the print would be that small, but
I
we'll try
understand.
to update that.
So some of the suggestions are, we did spend $100 million building the ecosystem, and the sustainability is an important component that we have to think beyond the research enterprise. And so I think building the links to the clinical delivery enterprise is going to be the major hurdle as well as the success of sustainability. When we think about the healthcare spending, which goes in $1 trillion, 2.4 or $2.5 trillion, no matter how much NIH or even the big pharma R&D budgets are, it's just a small part of the pot. And so the investments that get made when new data architectures are implemented and used are much more than the research dollars coming in. And so one must be cognizant of that. The second is eGEMS, one of our open source free access applications, has an issue special issue on sustainability. 7 papers already on there. 2 more will be published this week with a promotion coming out when that gets released. And those lessons learned would be useful as you think further steps. The bidirectionality of information is critical. It's not just the researchers getting information from the data sets and databases and getting new knowledge. It's feeding it back into the people who are creating the data in the first place, because the quality of the data is paramount. We can build everything, but if the quality of data is bad, we'll get no good knowledge coming out of that. So just a few thoughts on that.
That is wonderful, and you actually highlighted what I forgot to say. 2 of the areas that we really want to focus on in this coming year, one is the standards that I remembered to say, but the other is, in fact, the clinical data. So I very much would like to follow up with you on that. I was going to say something about your first point as well, and now I forgot because you had 4 points and lost track of them. But yeah, I'd like to follow up, and the clinical data is an area where we really do want to work with our brother and sister agencies as well as the larger group.
Other questions? Keith.
Keith Norris, UCLA. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. In talking about the utility of data to capture a lot of the information and go beyond publications and look at other strategies, has much thought been given to what are the sources or repositories where we capture information for projects that have not been successful? Because there's projects, and this is not just in biomedical informatics, but across the world, there are pilot projects being developed, innovative projects being developed. Some work, some don't work. The publication bias is such that if it doesn't work, it doesn't get published. And so there's a concern that much research is going into doing things over and over again that don't work.
And that is exactly why we're really interested in supporting data publications that are independent of research publications. Yes, it's important to have the data that's associated with the publication, but as you point out, if you have a negative trial, it's not going to get published. And yet those may be the very ones that you want to make sure people know are out there, and those data get out there so people don't keep doing it over and over again.
Or they may need to do it, but just in a different setting.
Yes.
Great. One last question.
I'm at the University of Washington and work partly with our CTSA, but also with our eScience Institute, which is a partnership between University of Washington, UC Berkeley, and NYU that's just been funded by about $40 million from the Moore and Sloan Foundation to do big data science. And I'm wondering how BD2K fits with the Moore and Sloan effort, which is very deliberately trying to be non-health sciences because they don't want to compete with NIH's effort to that sense, but I am the lone health science person working with our eScience Institute and wondering how we can bring these things together because our computer science group, up in Seattle is doing incredibly innovative things, as is Berkeley and NYU. How can we bring those to bear in health sciences? And so what's your vision with partnering with that?
Yes. No, actually, we had a great meeting, and we have a series of meetings I've been focusing on the biomedical research, but we're working with multiple different, both federal agencies, NSF, NOAA, NASA, EPA, all those things, and also with the various independent foundations as well. And like I said, we had a really great meeting to talk about a lot of these issues, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to just build a bigger silo. And yes, there are a lot of best practices in other communities that we want to learn about as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a great presentation. And the next one will be Doug. So Jenny has to leave earlier, but I'm sure she will answer any of your questions by email. And as she volunteered Heidi to answer some of those as well. But if you have questions, don't ask Siri, ask Sarah over there, who has encyclopedic knowledge of everything, as we noticed yesterday. So Sarah, please come to one of the tables, because they will be honored to have you sitting with them.